if you're going to take the time to make a transition, why would you transition into something that you're not going to be passionate about or something that you're really wanting to do? Because you're going to find yourself in the same position in a year or 6 months or 2 years or 3 years down the road. So I always tell everyone who's making any kind of career change just to make sure that you take the time and really figure out what it is that you want.
Revisiting it because you have to. Just because 10 years ago I was that person doesn't mean if I went to interview today that I wouldn't have to still revisit my process, revisit, how I'm engaging the answers to my question, know who you're talking to, know what their pain points are, be able to communicate how you're going to solve for it and make their life easy. Welcome back to the 5-Minute Career Hack Podcast. I'm excited. We've got a special guest for you today that is going to talk about career pivots and transitions in the workplace that I think is going to open up your mind. I've got none other than Nisrine Masri with me today. Welcome to the podcast, Nisrine. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Jamila. I'm honored to be on your show today, and I appreciate the opportunity to tell you my journey and my story.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. You've done a couple of amazing things over the last 22 years, but I want to start with, for the audience, like part of why they're here. What's the biggest mistake you see people make? Like when they want to pivot in their career, what's the biggest mistake that they make?
I think the biggest thing that I would say is making a pivot into something that you're not passionate about. I think it's really important to be very passionate about what you do every day because that's kind of the drive of the success, is being passionate about what you're wanting to do. Typically, someone's getting out of what they're doing because they've lost either the passion for it or things aren't panning out the way that they wanted it to be. And so they're looking for kind of a new journey. So, do something that where you can wake up every day um, excited, because when you're trying to build something new, if the passion and the drive isn't there, it's going to be hard to get the motivation and to find the success when you're just, every day, dragging because you're going to something that you're not passionate about. So, think it's really important to find what you're really passionate about because passion is what sells. And, obviously being an entrepreneur, you have to be able to sell. And so if you're selling something that you're not passionate about, it's going to be really hard to find success in that. I think for me, that's always kind of been the driving force for myself is that having passion for what I'm doing every day.
I think that's so important what you said there because oftentimes it comes like the move or the thought to even pivot comes from a sense of like pain, frustration, something's happening that you don't like. And
Right.
so the natural progression is run, get away,
Right.
do something
Right.
else. And
Right.
instead of jumping head first, right, into something, what I heard you say is, really taking the time to understand whatever that is that you want to go towards versus running away from something. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Because if you're going to take the time to make a transition, why would you transition into something that you're not going to be passionate about or something that you're really wanting to do? Because you're going to find yourself in the same position in a year or 6 months or 2 years or 3 years down the road. So I always tell everyone who's making any kind of career change just to make sure that you take the time and really figure out what it is that you want to do and what your end goal, your success is with that position, or whether you're building a new business or you're taking on a position somewhere else, is that take the time. Just don't take a position somewhere just to have a job. At the end
Right.
of the day, you're going to lose your passion for it. So really try to find a company that you either want to work for, that you like their culture, you see a future growth there, or if you're trying to build your own, business, what's your plan in 3 to 5 years, or what's your long-term goal? Are you planning on, this being the last company that you build before you retire and, that's your exit? So I think that's really important is actually really like taking the time and making sure that you're making the proper transition that's based on your passion, whatever that may be.
Right. So the question that I get often from my clients is, I don't know what that is. I don't know how to figure that out. Right. And I'm not going to say it's the same for everyone. So I'm not going to say, okay, give us the 5 steps to figuring out how to find your path. I think it's different for everybody. I do believe it's buried
Absolutely.
somewhere in your past. But I'd love to hear how you figured it out for yourself.
So this is going to sound kind of funny and a little insensitive, but money is what drives me. Passion. That to me is what makes me happy. So when I see success And I could tell you, I mean, no one wants to, I guess there's some people that like that may
Nope.
not be their passion, that may not be their drive. So for me, the return is the drive. The return of like, okay, if I'm doing this, this is my return. This is the life I'm going to have, or this is what I'll be able to provide for my family. So that to me is what drives me. Um, I'm in the moving and storage business. I'm in software also. So would I say those were the things that I grew up, as a little girl? Did I dream about being in the moving and storage industry and trucking, working with a bunch of truck drivers and movers? No, that wasn't it. But the passion and the mission and like building something, being in business for 22 years and then kind of trying to find a transition after that into something new as well. Um, to me, my passion and my drive is how far I can take things and then seeing, okay, I built this from scratch. I can't believe I just did that. So that drives me.
I
That's my
think that's
passion.
good. And that's okay. And no need to apologize for it because I'm very similar in the same way. For me, it's just the dynamic of making money make money has always been a passion of mine. And I just enjoy it. And to your point, I don't know if I guess there's some businesses that I wouldn't want to be involved in at all, but for the most part, the idea, and I think there's some team elements to that as well. The idea of bringing some people together and getting something across the finish line is just exhilarating for me. And then seeing people enjoy that as well. So I 100% agree with you. It for some people listening, it may not be that I want to be a doctor or practice medicine, lawyer. It could be just that drive to make something go or money,
Hmm.
right? And that's okay. No need to
Absolutely.
apologize for it. You were created that way.
Well, as an entrepreneur too, I find my personal passions in my hobbies outside of my career. So, if one of the things I love to do is paddleboard. Am I going to be a professional paddleboarder making a ton of money paddleboarding for like for probably not. Or, I like to do outdoor things and, hike and be outdoors, but those aren't going to provide me the life that I want. Um so I find my passions in life with things that I do outside of my career. And even though your business is and you're at work more than you are at home, but it's still, I still find passion in what I'm doing every day at work because building a company from ground up and seeing where I can take, is really an amazing thing. Sometimes I sit back and I think about I've been in business for 22 years. That's a really long time.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And what would you say, because that is a really long time. How did you specifically get to the moving company?
Yeah.
Like how did you get, what was that path to get there?
So, I grew up with a family of entrepreneurs. Both my parents own their own businesses growing up, so I've always been, around entrepreneurs, and they both had small businesses that I worked for them. Um, my initial career started in sales, so I was in sales and just did sales, and
Mhm.
I came across a third-party logistics company who was hiring, and I wanted a sales position for them and they didn't hire me for sales but said, hey, you can move up into sales eventually. We're going to start because you don't have any trucking experience, we'll bring you into a customer service position and you can move from there. I worked for them for 3 years and did several different positions for them and then eventually decided I was ready to start my own at the time. um, who's the now my ex-husband, he's still my business partner for the moving company, but we started the company together. He said, hey, I'm going to start a moving company. I was like, okay, I'm good in sales, so let's do it. So that's kind of how it started. It just kind of fell into it. We started from an extra bedroom in our house. I did all the sales and day to day, and it took a lot of work. So I always tell everyone, if you're starting your own business, just be prepared to work 10 hours a day. Be prepared to work
Mhm.
7 days a week because that's what it's going to take. you know
Right.
I don't really know very many small business owners that are golfing all day. If they are, then they just got lucky. But I don't know any. And 22 years later, I'm still working hard. I still work hard every day. I'm not out golfing. And there are definitely perks that come with it, but it's not like I'm just hanging out golfing all day.
Right.
So
That's not the recipe that you've been served up for your business.
no, no. And so it takes a lot of work. So I always tell everyone, hey, if you're wanting to do it, definitely do it. And I love helping people out and giving them advice. But you be ready to put in the work. If you want
Mhm.
success, you have to put in the work. No one's just born, even if you look at athletes, no one's born a natural athlete. Some people
Man.
are physically built for it, but you have to work you have to train and you have to work hard. Same with a business. If you're trying to build a company up, you've got to put the work in.
Right. And so how did that transition the moving company into the software as a service business that you have from a dispatch standpoint? Tell us about that.
So yeah, absolutely. 20 years, like 20 years in business. 2 years ago, I decided that I kind of want to diversify my portfolio and wanted to have, something where I had a diversified income where I was, making income from different avenues. And I'd always kind of seen an opportunity for the dispatch board for the moving and storage industry. It didn't exist. No one had developed it. I didn't understand why. Moving and storage, really technology wise, was always so far behind of the rest of the world, I feel like. And finally, in the last couple of years, now we're starting to kind of see more CRMs and more software. And there's still people out there doing stuff the old way on paper contracts, and believe it or not, it's just kind of insane to me that people are still working in the old school methods, but it's still happening. So I saw the opportunity, and I have, never developed software in my life. I did build, a couple of company websites for my first company, but just decided that it would just be a great idea. And like I said, being an entrepreneur, if you own one company, you're able to start something else. You're multi-talented. You're able to do accounting work, you're able to do marketing work, you're able to do sales, which is like the key thing. You're able to wear many hats. You have to. And so for me, it was I just needed to set up a development team, and basically I kind of just tell them what to do, and they just develop based on what I tell them. So
And
and that's
that's how
kind of how it happened. It's really funny because everyone's like, "How did you get into software?" And I was like, I saw an opportunity, and had I just been like a software developer, I would have never thought of the idea.
correct.
It took someone from the inside to say, "Hey, this doesn't exist." I've been in this industry for, over 20 years, and there isn't a load board for the moving and storage industry. So how is that possible? And that's
Yeah.
when I
So
decided to go for it.
I think what you said there is so critical that sometimes you don't need to be a software developer or whatever that end thing is. But if you're ingratiated in the business or that industry and you're seeing how it's working day to day for over 20 years, at that point, you see all the gaps. So I know everybody listening, wherever you are, whatever industry you're working in, you're day to day seeing everything that's happening. You know the gaps. You're probably complaining at the water cooler about them, but
Yes.
there's
Yes.
probably a hidden software as a service business or some form of business that's available for you to be the one to start. I know
Right.
one of the things that
Right.
I find so intriguing is the person that started the Spotify Wrapped, where they like give you that wrap up of your listens and everything that you did on
Mhm. Mhm.
Spotify. It was just someone that was working, just I wouldn't call it a low level job, but just a mid level job, if you will, that said, "Hey, this would be like really great for me to understand what I listen to and consume throughout the year and what everybody that I like and know are doing too." And that was
Yeah.
it. And now it's
It's
turned
brilliant.
into not just for Spotify, but everybody's doing that same concept now.
Yes.
But it's just
Yes.
one person that saw something from the inside and decided to share that knowledge and build something out of it. So
Right.
I thought that was so huge. The other thing that you said that I'd love to talk a little bit more about is you mentioned you decided you wanted to diversify your options for income and your business. Was there something specific that made you make that decision? Because when I'd say I'm like on the pulpit talking about career options like no one else, I'm just curious what sparked that for you.
Well, I figured that I saw a really good opportunity, and it was, to me, it was kind of an investment. I don't invest in stocks, which everyone's like, why don't you do that? It's because I just I feel like it's too risky for me, so I prefer
Right.
not to. So I
Yeah.
don't. But I had the funds, and I figured I would have just invest in myself. And
Mm,
I bootstrapped my company, and I knew that whatever I invested in myself, I knew I would see the return, that I would
yeah.
get the return back, because I knew that I could, I knew what my work ethic was, and I knew that I had given myself no room for, error, or no room, well, error, not say, we always make errors and mistakes, but no room for failure. It's like failure is not going to be an option.
Yeah.
So, um I took the investment in myself. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a funny thing, and maybe some people agree with it, some people don't, but for me, that was the opportunity that I saw, was that, okay, I see a really good opportunity here, and I know that I'll see the return into this, just so I'm gonna invest into myself, into something different. So that's kind of why I
Right.
did it, just because I saw an opportunity with
Right.
some return.
Perfect. So you saw an opportunity for return. I guess I just wondered like how, and you're in business for yourself, so I know that comes with it to a certain degree. You just think just slightly different than someone that's working maybe a 9 to 5. But getting multiple streams of income or diversifying your streams of income to me seems like a no-brainer. But a lot of people will put their all their eggs in one basket, if you will, and find themselves either laid off, some if an entrepreneur out of business if the tide swings or what have you, and you've chosen a different route and probably didn't have to. I guess I'm just really trying to help someone understand w- like what's the thing that has to click, if you will, to know that I've got to go out here and make sure that I've got more than one option.
I think I'm a real big risk taker, but a safe risk taker. I'll take
Mhm.
risks knowing they're kind of planned risks, or risks that are really well thought out, of what's the return on this risk that I'm going to take. And then in this basically, I really took an investment into myself, saying, okay, this is something that I know really well. This is a need that I know exists, and
Mhm.
the return is going to be there. So I know I have to put in the work to it. Um, I think it's a great idea not to put your eggs all in one basket. I think it's super, it's important to kind of know, not necessarily to have a backup plan, because I know I talk about that on other podcasts that I've been on. I think anytime you have a real backup plan, like a real backup plan,
Like for
it's
real.
not such a great idea, because at that you're kind of allowing yourself to fail, because if this doesn't work out, I'm going to do this. Well, the real thing is when you jump into something or a change, there should really not be a thought of, if this fails, what am I going to do? If this is not looking right, or things aren't shaping properly, you got to kind of look back at yourself and see, what have you been doing? What do you need to change?
Mm.
So I always kind of like revert and come back. And I was in sales for a long time, and obviously being an entrepreneur, I sell also. I get on the phone. I love sales. And what I always tell my salespeople is, when you're not selling, look back at yourself and see what you're doing wrong. Just take a step back and look at your process. Look at what you're telling people. Look at how people are responding to you. Look at your process and see what's wrong with why am I not able to sell, or what is it that I've been doing? And I do that with my business too. When things are not going the wrong way, or not the right way, and we're failing, or we're not doing something right, I go back and look at the process of, what are we doing? Why is this not giving me the return that I want? So I think that's really important, is to kind of like have a plan where, if things aren't looking the way that you want them to, be able to kind of reshape and change things up, you
Yeah,
know,
I think that's
without the
important.
thought of, you're going to fail,
Right,
you're
because
going to make it happen.
when that true black backup plan exists for your the way you mentioned it, it does leave room for you to just say, okay, well, I'm not going to fix whatever's potentially wrong with me or the business or whatever I'm working on, whatever project I'm doing. I'm not going to do the work to figure out how to solve that problem because I can just go over here and just fall back on this.
Right,
I
right.
think that's so key.
Yeah, it's very important. So if you're not able to sell, why? Is it your price? Is it your market? Is it your product? So you can kind of look back and see what changes you have to make in whatever you're doing, and just kind of like adjust to your market, or adjust to whatever. There's a reason why. So you just kind of know what that why is, and then kind of adapt and change to that.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, especially during the interview process, which seems to always be a sticking point when the job market changes, that there's probably something you need to tweak. There's probably some connection point that you're not making or articulating inside of that interview process that's not getting you to the next step. Because in my
Right.
mind, right, when I was in corporate America and I was interviewing for jobs, there was no doubt in my mind if I got in front of them, they wanted me, right?
Yes.
That's it.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Absolutely.
they're after this interview with me, they're done. It's on to like whatever else I got to do to formalize the process. And so what is not happening to where you feel that way when you enter into that situation, solving a business problem in the interview process, whatever it might be, to make sure a sales call, like you mentioned, to make sure that process is 100%. But I think the thing that you mentioned about revisiting it because you have to, just because 10 years ago I was that person doesn't mean if I went to interview today that I wouldn't have to still revisit my process, revisit, how I'm engaging the answers to my question to be even better
Oh
today.
yeah,
Right?
absolutely. Well, I think too that's a big mistake is that people make is that when you're in a position, whether it be in sales or in business, you have to constantly change your skill set. You constantly have to self improve yourself because technology and the industries are always things are always changing. And if you're stuck in your ways and you're not willing to change your ways, you're going to be left
Yeah.
behind. So 22 years ago when we started our company, technology was so different and the way things were
Right.
done were so different. Rules and regulations were different than they are today. So you have to adapt and change and constantly change yourself. So the way you were interviewing then, you still have to work on the skills of if you're back in the market trying to interview again, you have to work on those skills again. You have to keep those, up to par. Otherwise, you're not going to see the results that you want. So it's really important to constantly knowledge, stay up to date. I watch a lot of different like podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts and different reels, sales reels. They kind of help me with my day to day. One
Mhm.
podcast that I listen to a lot, which is the SaaS podcast. It's very relevant to my industry for the dispatch board. One of my favorites, but they interview a lot of people in the same, SaaS businesses. And that's been one that I've gotten so much knowledge from different, CEOs and people, CTOs, and different people that are working for these big technology companies, and you kind of hear what they've been doing and how they're doing things, and they kind of make you see things a little bit differently. So you constantly have to stay on top of the trends that are out there.
Which I love that you said that in the context of your software business because obviously it is for real ever evolving. There is no
Yes,
and it's fast. But even as someone is as successful as you are, having a new startup, relatively still new startup, you're still outsourcing to make sure that you're upskilling, staying ahead of the trends in the tech space, but also in the actual industry that you're serving. Because it's two.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. It helps that I came in with the moving and storage experience, so on the operational side of things, I knew how the operation would work. I know how the drivers are communicating with their dispatchers, how loads are, how they change hands. I know how the rules and regulations of the federal motor carrier who kind of oversees the industry, what they're looking for as far as like licensing for carriers and movers, and knowing that we are not putting unlicensed movers on our platform. So there's a lot to know. So just because we're in the technology space, there's still a lot of other stuff that we have to know about the industry. It's not just like, okay, here we're going to launch this, but we don't know anything about the operational
Right.
side. So that was a real big plus for me with that. If I had to kind of learn the whole industry and get into software, it would have been kind of a nightmare. But like I said, I saw an opportunity with something I was really good at to begin with, obviously with, over 20 years experience at the time. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me.
Right. And what I heard you say that for the audience is that being an expert, right? You had depth of experience in your industry that allowed you to step into another industry and leverage that expertise, right? Without having to like literally start from scratch. And I think so often people are, it's just such a huge issue right now for so many job seekers is transferable skills. Their inability to see that, like you said, so many people are like, well, how did you get into software? Well, I had this massive knowledge base and I'm an expert in transportation and moving companies. And then I just took this and told the people that are experts in software development to make what I need them to make. So you're the brain. They just coded your brain onto a software application in
Exactly.
essence.
Exactly. And it was really cool. It was a very interesting experience. Sometimes I sit back and I look at it and It's a constant development. So anytime you're developing software, it's constant updates. Obviously, like you're just people's smartphone, you constantly
Yeah.
have updates. Any software program that you're using, there's constant updates. There's constant bugs that you're finding. We constantly release updates every month. My developers, I have lists of how I prioritize what we're going to develop for new features and what we're going to develop for updates
Mm.
or fixes and things like that. So every month we're releasing a newer version. Um, but it's just, you know, it's not something that you just generate and then just release, you know. You can't do that. It's a constant. So if you're ever deciding to get into software, like just be ready.
Right.
It's not a develop and release. It's a develop and release and continue
Eh,
developing. And
it's a
you're better
journey.
wait. It's a total journey. But sometimes I look back at it and I'm just kind of blown away that I was able to take something that was in my head and like transfer it onto an actual program that now people are using. Like, oh wow, this is pretty cool that I was able to put this together. So it's motivating, and that's kind of another thing of my passion. You know, I was able to build something. So building things from scratch is kind of my passion. So it doesn't matter really what industry I'm in. I could, you know,
Yeah.
I told you about my contracting skills.
Yes, you did.
So
You can make it happen. That's I know you're listening and you're probably like, "What's she talking about?" Don't worry about it. That's for a whole other episode.
another
Yes, she's out here general contracting as well simultaneously. But I love what you said there, and I think how I would tie that in a bow is that you've taken your expertise and created a ton of value, right? And so I think we sometimes discount our intellectual property and our experience as a value proposition for a completely different business. So those that are, whether you're
absolutely.
20, 30 years into your career, you have a ton of intellectual property that is just waiting to be woven together, whether that's a software business or independent business, whatever that might be. I think it's truly inspiring because I think when you get to doing something for so long and you've just done it and it's easy for you to some degree because you know it, that you discount just how valuable it is. I think that's a
Yes,
huge mistake we
absolutely.
make, right? I tell
Absolutely.
people all the time, like, I know you think that was easy what you just said, what you just did, but it's not. That's 20 years of experience.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, and that you don't if someone's trying to make a career change, you don't really necessarily have to go into something that's completely different. Sometimes you can kind of go into an industry that's very parallel to what you already know and just kind of transition over into something, you know, new. And I'm all about transitioning into new things. You know, I kind of one of the reasons why I did get into the software side of things is because I've been doing the same thing for so long. I kind of wanted to kind of like freshen things up for me and give myself something challenging, something new. And so I stayed really in the same field that I'm in, but just kind of took another little avenue in the same industry really that I'm already in. My clients are really my competition on the other side, but it works
Yeah.
out great. And it's easy to sell because I understand my clients. When I reach out to my clients, I know the struggles they're having, I know the solution I brought to the table, and I can easily communicate with them. So they understand me and I understand them. And when I developed knowing who my users were. I got truck drivers, and I got dispatchers and small business owners that don't have a lot of time to sit and watch 5,000 training videos and go
Right.
through an onboarding process. Nobody has time for that. So when I developed, it was very user friendly, and you could, log in, get on, and use the platform without having to watch a 5 hour video.
Right. Right. So knew the pain point, knew the struggle, exactly how to communicate it to them and then make it very easy, right? I
Right.
love that.
Right.
That's the framework for those looking for a job, those looking for a promotion. It's the exact same framework. There's no difference. Is know who you're talking to, know what their pain points are, be able to communicate how you're going to solve for it and make their life easy. Done.
Yeah. Yeah. I knew my audience and my end user.
Yeah, that's key. That's key. Well, we always like to wrap up every episode by asking our guests for their final 5 words. So if you wanted to share like motivation, inspiration, whatever you might call it with the audience, I'd love for you to share 5 words to leave them with.
5 words. So you want them
Yeah.
in 5 words in a sentence? That's so.
Totally up to you. Everybody
All
always
right.
says, so should I
So
separate?
five
Nope.
words.
It's
Okay.
totally up to you.
All right. So honestly, my 5 words would be, like I started off the show earlier, was to find something that you're passionate with and then know what your end goal with that new change that you're trying to make. So take the time in the transition and figure out exactly what you really want to do before you make that transition, because you're in a transition period right now, but don't make the transition into the wrong thing. Make a transition into something that you know is going to pan out and return and give you the return, whether it be financial return or self reward or whatever that may be for you, but find something that will give you what you're looking for. And the other thing is, don't ever give up on yourself, because the minute you've given up on yourself, you won't, and I think that's really important, is that you wake up every day knowing that you're going to get what you want. So it's kind of a mindset. It's a mindset that you have to have, that failure is not an option. You cannot fail. So it's
So you
super
you
important.
gave us like about 5 bars. I
Five
got
times five, 25.
there you go. And I think I would summarize it, said, don't give up on yourself, right? And failure is not an option, I think was the running theme throughout this. I think it's super dope what you've done by not going from, but evolving your business into a software as a service business. I think it's super cool. And I appreciate you sharing your journey as well as some great tips for how others can pivot in their industry career or into a business of their own, and invest in themselves, like you said. So I appreciate you
Definitely.
being on the
Thank
podcast
you.
today. Thank you
Yes, thank
so
you.
much. It was
Thank
an
you for
absolute
having
pleasure.
me. Let your audience know y'all can reach me on LinkedIn. If anyone ever has any, personal reach outs, that they DM me on LinkedIn, I'd be more than happy
Yes,
to answer any questions. Sometimes people love to just like, oh, I wonder if I could ask her this. So feel free to reach out to me on
absolutely.
LinkedIn. Yeah.
And we'll leave the link in the show note description for you guys to connect with her. Do yourself a favor. It's worth the time spent. Thank you so much, Nisrine, and we will
Thank
hopefully see
you.
you again soon on
I'd
the
love to.
5 Minute Career podcast for sure. I definitely got some ideas as we were talking. And as I always like to end every podcast, until next time, I love you and I'll talk to you soon.